safely. Can I get an amen, right? So they work in general. Now, here's another feature they added not long ago that I thought was pretty cool. They added multiple destinations. And I was like, man, that is actually a cool feature, because some of you are like this. Say you're on a road trip to North Carolina, and some of you are these type A kind of people, and you're like, okay, before we go there, I'm going to plan out this trip, and here's where we're going to stop for potty, and you've only got a 5-minute break because you're going to get there, and if you got to go potty next time, you just better hold it for a long time, because, man, that is off the course, and God forbid you go to Cracker Barrel, because it'll delay us for about an hour and a half whenever you get to Cracker Barrel. We are going to get there. We're going to get there on time, and there's no stopping off points. The destination is what we're after, right? But there's others of you that want to enjoy the journey. You're like, I don't care if it takes a couple extra hours. We're eating us some Cracker Barrel. That Sunshine Sampler is what I am all about. And if it delays us like an hour, that is absolutely okay, right? So you enjoy some of those stopping off points on your way to that destination. So during the course of this year, there's going to be stopping off points for you to enjoy some of those. And others of you are going to look towards the end of the year and you're going to say, that's where I want to get, and I'm going to go after it with everything within me. So let's start to draw some spiritual analogies to my mapping analogy, right? Each of us has a starting point of where we're at as a believer in our maturity. Some of us are infants in the faith, some of us are children in the faith, some of us are young adults, and some of us are parents. Some of you are even grandparents in the faith, reproducing and helping others grow up in their faith as well, right? So each of us has this starting point. It's important that we understand our starting point. It's very and vitally important that we have a grasp of where we're at, right? So we're going to go to this map in a second to describe that, this graphic that we have up there. But what happens is we have to have a starting point and we have to have a destination spiritually in mind. That destination is spiritual growth. That destination is growing from wherever we are to the next level in our faith. So it's important that we have a plan to do that. Because how many of you, if you look at your life, you started a year without a plan and you just drifted spiritually. You got there and you're like, man, I don't know what to do. Nobody's ever taught me how to grow. Nobody's ever given me a set of next steps so that I could grow in my faith. And you got to the end of another year and you're like, man, I showed up at church about 30 times, but I don't know what I really grew in that year, you know? We don't want that to happen. We want to provide you with some tools for this journey where you could grow spiritually through the course of this year. So I'm going to take a few moments and describe these different stages that we might find ourselves so that we know where we're at as we begin this journey. And then I'm going to conclude by giving you a spiritual map for 2013 and some final tools that if you want to partner with us in advancing the gospel and growing spiritually yourself, I'm going to give you some tools to do that as well. Is that okay with you? So let's go there. I know this picture's a little bit hard to read, but when we went back to those first three scriptures that we read, they really represent the green, the yellow, and the cross that are there. God has to be at the center. God has to be our true north on our spiritual mapping system. If we don't have Jesus as the truth and the foundation of the work that he did on the cross, then our destination is going to be all messed up. We're going to go to the wrong place. He has to be first. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, soul, and mind. He has to be first and foremost in our life. And then what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to image God. We're created and formed in his image is what Genesis tells us. It says we're to live lives of worship in community on mission. So this is what we need to be doing as believers in Jesus Christ. Putting God first, living out this God first kind of lifestyle that's described in that green tier. And then the red one is, where are you at? Don't be offended by that first word that says spiritually dead. Spiritually dead means that you're not a believer in Jesus Christ. The Bible says that you must be born again of the spirit and the flesh, right? We must be born again to live this God-first Christian life. So that's the starting point for each of us who is a believer in this room. There is a day where you surrendered your heart to Jesus. You said, you are my Lord and Savior. I am going to live for you. And then we became infants in the faith, right? Infants are a pretty cool stage. Isn't it beautiful to be around infants, right? I mean, we have a new granddaughter. Her name is Lila. And yesterday we were at the house and we got to experience something pretty cool with her for the first time. She was eating from real baby food for the first time. And it was like, man, this is cool. We're so glad we got to experience this life moment with her. So little babies, when healthy, man, they grow very rapidly, don't they? I mean, it's so neat. Like you see them one week and then they come the next week and you're like, dang, Diego really grew big quick, you know. They take off and they sprout and everything's new to them. And the first time they smile at you, you're like, they just smiled. No, they just burped. It was okay, right? You know, and then we mark these milestones where they start to walk and we're excited. Oh, look at the first steps. Look when they rolled over, right? We get excited about all these rapid things that we see happening in the life of an infant. In a spiritual sense, it is the same way. It's a time of discovery for a new believer, man. You get saved and you're like, wow, this is so cool. Let me start reading the word. Did God write this just for me? We start to have these feelings of cleanness. We start to see these outward behaviors and things that we used to do. They start to go by the wayside, right? And we start to live this new life and we're excited about it. And hopefully there are others along the way that begin to guide us and help us so that we could live this Christian life. Because just like a child that has no love or no parents around, their spiritual growth or their natural growth is going to be stunted, is it not? It'll be stunted, so you need people there to care for you. If we weren't feeding Lila the bottle, if we weren't starting to give her the right food at the right stage, her physical growth would be stunted. In a spiritual sense, it's the same way. I think there's a challenge, though, as we move from infant to children, especially in the American church. I don't think we've done a great job of setting up this path of spiritual growth for us to move from being an infant to a child to a young adult. We have a whole bunch of spiritual children in the American church because the pastors and leaders, myself included, us as a group have not done a great job of sowing into people's lives and giving them a plan for spiritual growth. There's been a numerical growth movement in the church over the past 20 years or so. It's all about filling up every seat and making sure we get all the churches full. And the churches that are acclaimed are the ones with the highest attendance and the most people that show up and the biggest buildings and the best lights. How did it come to a place in Christianity where that's the stuff that matters and they're not measuring the discipleship process that's happening behind the scenes? We've done a great disservice. We wonder why people often behave like children in the church, where they get upset about things like the color of the carpet or you name it, and they move and they go to different places and they never contemplate if they're living a sent life or a called life, or God's called them to a particular place or they're being sent out to another. They just randomly go do whatever the heck they want to do because they're spiritual children, right? See, what happens is when you move past infancy, you get all this growth and man, you're fired up, and then all of a sudden, if you're not careful, you can stagnate as a child. You see, what happens is you start to go to some things like, man, I don't cuss anymore, but I don't give. What is that? What do you mean? You're going to surrender one aspect of your life to God, but not another. You hold certain aspects back and you start saying, mine. Mine. How many of you have seen a kid do that? Come on, some of you were that kid. We all were, right? That's a natural tendency of every kid. You're saying, this is mine, you can't have it, God. I'm reserving this area of my life for me, and you can't get it. Those are childlike behaviors. That's something we expect from a person at that stage. Here's where it gets weird, right? Say in the natural, how many of you seen a kid that's just a little bit too old to still be breastfeeding? That's weird, right? Isn't that just weird, right? You've all seen it, right? It happens in the church all the time. In fact, Paul spoke of it. He says, you're still drinking milk. What's wrong with you? I want to feed you meat. I want to get you off of milk and onto these deeper things, but you have no mastery of the basics. I can't do that yet because you're not willing to grow. You're staying spiritually stunted. So there's a challenge in Christianity in America today where either we haven't been taught how to grow, or we're obstinate and we want to stay childlike in our faith and we don't have a desire to grow. And when we're challenged to grow, we bail. Oh man, he's asking me to change. He's asking me to put God first in my life. That means this has to go and this has to go. No, but that's mine. I'm going to keep it because I don't want to release it to God. So there's this challenge in not only our church, but in American Christianity, where people want to hold on to this stage. But what happens is we need to grow on to become young adults. There comes a day where you need to go to junior and senior high, where you need to get ready to go to college, where you need to get ready to leave the house, right? Those are what happens in a natural progression of things. But we have this prolonged adolescence in our society where 30-year-olds are still living with mama playing video games all day. That's not healthy, people. That's not good, right? We need to move past that, and it's become a signature in our society, and it's become a signature in our churches that needs to be broken. See, young adults, they also have this vibrancy of life, man. They're like, wow, I've got a good understanding of the basics. I understand these things. I understand doctrine. I understand what it means to live on mission. I understand that I'm created and formed in the image of God. I understand that my whole life should be a life of worship. But occasionally they get ahead of themselves, right? They get all zealous and fired up and they think they have all the answers, right? How many of you were a teenager or had a teenager and they know everything and they don't have to listen to their parents, right? Oh, you were too quick to say that. You know that feeling, right? Sometimes there's goods and bad sides of each of these stages, right? So you could be a young adult and there's a lot of things that you're really hitting on all cylinders, and there's a few areas where you think you got it all together and have all the answers, but you don't. What do you need? You need a good parent or a mentor or a spiritual father or mother to be there to help guide you through those so that they can help you, because what usually happens is that when you hit your 20s and you come around, all of a sudden, man, my mom and dad were right. And you're like, oh, I can't believe it. I'm so upset that they were right? But we realize that as we mature, right? So we move from being a young adult. So what do young adults do, man? They get it in the church. They serve, they give, they go out there and maybe they're helping to facilitate a small group. They're like, man, I'm ready to take my life to the next level. And they do the things that would be outward indicators of maturing spiritually. So how do I know that our church and others are mostly children? I could use some statistics. Probably 30% of you serve, maybe 25% of you or 20% of you tithe. You know, these are some outward indicators. I could go through a number of other ones. A small group participation, maybe 40% of you are in some form of a small group. So that means there's 60 to 70% of you that are probably, in all honesty, if you were to take a spiritual inventory of yourself, in a child to young adult stage. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Whatever your starting place is, it's good. But here's the challenge. If you come to the realization that you're not where you want to be today, it is a sin to stay where you're at. Because you're like that child that's getting a little bit too old to still be breastfeeding. You get what I'm saying? Yes, sir. So God's saying if you're still a child or if you're a young adult or an infant, the path is spiritual growth. He says he wants you to mature in your faith. Now, there's a job for the corporate church to do to help equip you for the work of the ministry, but there's things that you need to be doing as well. So if you still find yourself at the end of 2013 and you're not giving, you're not serving, you're not participating, chances are you're stuck. I don't want you to be stuck. I want you to grow, because parents that are healthy do some cool things. See, parents reproduce. They realize that it is not about them anymore. It's about God and his mission and his plan and his purposes. And they go out there and they live their lives to make a difference in the lives of others. It's not about them. When you become a parent and you're a healthy parent, your life's kind of thrown out the door. You ever realize that? You start to live to try to ensure that your kids hopefully will succeed, right? Your life's priorities change. You were about you before. You were about going out there maybe and partying like I was in my young age. You were about the things about you, but all of a sudden your priorities begin to shift because you want to see them do well. You know, we've had a conversation in our house lately. You know, college is expensive, man. That stuff's not cheap, right? So we're like, we keep giving all our money to our kids. We don't got retirement. You know, there's going to come a day we need to get selfish for ourselves again so that we could be effective grandparents, right?